Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan has dismissed comments of political interference at Eskom while defending outgoing CEO Andre de Ruyter. Gordhan, Eskom board chairperson Mpho, Makwana and de Ruyter briefed the media earlier today. This follows de Ruyter's resignation from the embattled power utility yesterday. This resignation comes as rolling blackouts continue. We're currently on stage 4. Our reporter Heidi Giokos has been following this story and joins us now. So Heidi, you were there, you went to Megawatt Park this morning. First of all, it was a virtual conference, which is so strange, bearing in mind the gravity of this. Was everyone on holiday? What was the problem?
I wish I knew, but we do know that Sikonati is on holiday and he is on leave. He made that very clear. I found it quite surprising that Andre de Ruyter was sitting in his office, but he was on Zoom. He was not in the actual conference room where the briefing was being held. We also understand that the chair of the board, Mpho Makwana, was also in the building, but he was not present in the actual conference room where the briefing was being held. This frustrated journalists beyond, with some journalists even deciding to walk out of that media briefing because questions were not allowed to be asked. Only one round of questions for those online and one in the room, and there were no follow-ups. So that was a very big problem, and it just did not allow for transparency and for us to raise very important questions.
Yeah, and there are so many questions. One thing you did find out, though, is that Andre de Ruyter says his position has become untenable. Why?
Yes, he says his position became untenable because as much as we don't want to really admit this, he does work in a political environment and there's a lot of political pressures at play here. Not only the fact that he needs to keep the lights on, there are economic consequences for rolling blackouts, but there's also a political aspect to all of this. And he said that he no longer receives that support when it comes to the political environment. He's also expressed disappointment that he will no longer be able to fulfill his obligations and duties as a CEO, given he is going to be leaving at the end of March. You could see that he was not very happy, but it's almost as though, Sally, he had no other choice and he decided to leave. And again, this falls at the back of those comments that were made by the Energy Minister Gordhan last week, basically accusing Eskom of trying to overthrow the state. And this, of course, wouldn't sit well with somebody who has been at pains to try and stop load shedding, who's been at pains to try and deal with the corruption and sabotage within the power utility. But I want us to listen to what the CEO had to say to South Africans today.
I'm obviously disappointed that I could not achieve all of the objectives that I had set myself. I think the circumstances surrounding Eskom are well known. The operational challenges, the financial challenges, the challenges surrounding societal matters, including crime and corruption. Given recent media reports, I'm unfortunately currently in a position where I do not regard that position as being tenable, and I have accordingly decided to step back, afford the shareholder and the board the opportunity to appoint a candidate to the position of Group Chief Executive who may be better suited, may be better equipped for the strategic and operational objectives at hand.
So, you know, Heidi, when this news broke yesterday, everyone I interviewed, from Kosato to Mark Swilling to Chris Yelland, people who know the business of Eskom, all pointed to the comments that Gordhan had made, all pointed to the fact that none of the cabinet came out and condemned what Gordhan had said or spoke out in support of Andre de Ruyter and Eskom. So the Public Enterprises Minister was there. I presume the obvious question was asked about that.
Yes, in fact, Chris Yelland did pose that question on the Zoom chat and said, and asked the question especially to the chair of the board, but also to the minister, whether or not they believe Andre de Ruyter is a traitor and whether or not they believe that he was basically pushed out because of those comments that were made last week. Also, given the fact that nothing was really said, I posed that question to the Minister of Public Enterprises to say, do you not believe that there is political interference here? You have had 13 CEOs in the last 13 years. It's almost one CEO every year. How are you going to create any kind of stability at a power utility that cannot keep the lights on? And the minister, of course, saying that those comments are unacceptable, and he does not agree with those comments made by the minister. You could see he wanted to say a little bit more, but of course, there are politics at play here. They're both ministers. There have been allegations made about the fact that these two ministers perhaps don't really get along, and this might also be the fallout that's happening at Eskom, which at the end of the day should not be the focus. If Andre de Ruyter was the right man for the job, he should have not been put under any kind of pressure to perhaps leave, or these comments should have rather been said, you should not be making these comments. Everything has been done to try and turn the power utility around. And as you could hear from Andre de Ruyter, he said, I tried my very best. I'm disappointed that I won't be able to continue because there were many plans that were expected to unfold next year under the leadership of Andre de Ruyter. But let's listen to the minister about his response to what he felt about Gwede Mantashe's responses.
In relation to overthrow of the state and traitor, the emphatic answer is no. I'm not going to qualify it anyway, Chris. I think that's unfair. Whatever commentary one might have about any individual, it is absolutely unfair and uncalled for to use that kind of language for somebody who tried their best to get Eskom out of the mess that it was in onto a different kind of platform. And the more knowledgeable people amongst you know that the mess didn't start in 2019. It didn't start in 2009 or 10 or 11 or 12. It started a long time ago. And there's a long list of people who must be held responsible.
Yeah, making the point that Eskom's problems did not begin overnight. There have been many, many years, decades even in the making. I think the one concern that many South Africans have is, will Andre de Ruyter's departure, which of course is only at the end of March, does it signal that there's a changing philosophy in how to deal with the load shedding problem? Did you get any sense from anyone who spoke at the conference today that this means there's going to be big change now?
Not necessarily, Sally, and even the chair of the board, Mpho Makwana, indicated that they are at pains to try and bring an end to the constant rolling blackouts that we have been seeing, especially over the last couple of months. What's also interesting here is that the Minister of Public Enterprises, which is also the shareholder here, did indicate that they will continue with their plans moving forward, and the resignation of Andre de Ruyter does not mean that their plans to try and make sure that the power utility operates to full capacity is now going to be stopped because the CEO has resigned. They're going to continue with their unbundling of the power utility, but I think what's key here is the fact that there have been allegations that Andre de Ruyter was completely sidelined. There have been reports that he was not being involved, he was not being included by the new board. Yes, especially by the new board. And when the question was actually asked about the political interference and the sidelining of the CEO, the answer from the chair of the board, Mpho Makwana, was there is none of that happening, and we're doing our very best to sort out the power utility. So that was the response. But I do have to emphasize, Sally, that there was a lot of frustration from journalists because we could not ask the questions we wanted to. And when we did get an opportunity to ask one round of questions, our questions were not answered.
That is very troubling, because what we need to deal with uncertainty is clear answers and a clear sense that everything's going to be okay. Let's talk about what we're always thinking about, which is load shedding. We know that we've moved down to stage 4. Yesterday, Mark Swilling said on the show, get used to being between levels 4 and 5 and 6 for the next few years. You know, the aim was, until quite recently, we're just going to have to get used to levels 1 and 2. Now it looks like we might be in for deeper cuts, more prolonged cuts. Did you get a sense of the December plan and what they're hoping to do in terms of load shedding, bearing in mind we don't have money for diesel?
Yes, and that question was asked in terms of diesel availability and what's going to happen. Again, not really answered. A lot of the questions weren't even read out. But I think what we do need to get ready for is that it's not going to get better, Sally. And the indication from the chair of the board was the fact that they are battling to keep the lights on, and they're battling to stabilize the grid. So unfortunately, we might have a very dark festive season, a very dark Christmas. Whether or not we are going to be pushed up to stage 6, 7 or 8, we're not entirely sure. And I did ask the question about Matla Power Station and whether or not there's going to be any impact
that
there.
Was after the fire last night.
Yes,
yes.
Where a fuel section of Unit 6 went up in flames, and they said that they've brought the matter under control. But I think at the end of the day, we need transparency and we need to understand exactly what's going on. I remember interviewing Andre de Ruyter in 2020 or 2021, I can't remember exactly when, and he said in the next 8 to 10 months we should see the back of load shedding, and look where we are today.
Yeah.
So there are many issues, and of course the power utility is very complicated and complex, and there's a lot of issues at play, but at the end of the day they need to find a way, whether it's Andre de Ruyter or another CEO, they need to find a way to sort this out.
Yeah, and one thing we do know is that from tomorrow South Africa goes a lot quieter. This is our quiet season after the public holiday tomorrow, even with the ANC conference underway. Most South Africans are heading for a short break, for a short holiday. A lot of industries are closing up for a couple of weeks. So let's hope that gives Eskom a bit of a reprieve, and then us in terms of those stages of load shedding. Well, Heidi, thank you for giving us everything you know on Eskom. That, of course, is Heidi Giokos there.